Excellent. I'm going to talk to you about the golden thread. As Denise has said, I'm going to introduce myself quickly. The proprietor of Resolve Risk, but I'm speaking today to you as the chair of the Building Safety Alliance. I'll talk to you at the end of this about some guidance we issued a couple of weeks ago, which is fairly detailed and gives practical advice on how people might pull together the golden thread, but I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Just to be very clear, the golden thread relates to HRBs, work of any descriptions, whether you're developing a new one or undertaking work within an HRB in England. Okay. It relates to the collation of evidence. In the design and construction phase, it says there, the function of it is for the design team and latterly the constructing team to collect all the information relating to the design and the construction of the building they're doing, or the refurbishment work or servicing work or whatever it happens to be that you're doing, that in compliance with building regulations. Because when you get to the Gateway 3, you are going to need to evidence that to building control. Now, as an HRB, that is the building safety regulator. The golden thread needs to be in place as part and parcel of the Gateway 2 application. So that is the application to get building control approval in the first instance. So it needs to be in place at Gateway 2 and then added to all the way through the design and build. And when you get to Gateway 3, the whole lot will be updated and presented to the regulator to say, this is the evidence that the building that we have produced or the work we've undertaken complies with building regulations. When you move it from the design construction into the management element, which is the much longer term, there are two bits really to this. One is if you've got the luxury of a new build, you should have a very detailed collection of documentation. If you have existing stock, you are going to be building this over a period of time. For those who've got HRBs, they will no doubt have had to register them. If not, it's a criminal offence. And as part and parcel of that exercise, you put up key building information, which is the very beginning of all of this. But as you undertake work, you need to have a golden thread. And the purpose in the management phase over the 40, 50, 60 years, whatever it is that the building is occupied, and it's a high-rise building, a high-risk building. These are the 18 metre, 7-storey residential buildings. But I'll come back to that point in a tick. The job of the accountable person or the principal accountable person is the management and mitigation of risk presented by building safety risk, which is a defined term. It's the spread of fire, naturally kind of a spread of fire without fire, and structural failure. That's the focus of the principal accountable or the accountable person's duties under these regulations. Of course, the existing regulations about all the other health and safety issues are still outstanding and need to be done. Therefore, that in all that information, documentation, records that you're managing the building properly will be included as part and parcel of your golden thread. Just as a note here, as I've just said, the only legal requirement relates to HRBs in England. These are the buildings 7 stories or 18 metres with 2 or more residential units. However, perhaps not so well-known amendment made by the Building Safety Act to the Building Act was to omit a section 35A of the Building Act. 35A essentially gave a 2-year window for the purposes of prosecution under the building regulations. That is now omitted from October 23, I believe. So from now on, the risk of prosecution for non-compliance with building regulations is unlimited as far as I can ascertain. Now, I've spoken to lawyers, I've spoken to a lot of colleagues, I've even spoken to barristers, and we cannot find a limit to the opportunity for regulators, whoever is concerned, enforcement officers, to prosecute for non-compliance with building regs. Therefore, I would suggest, even if you've got a non-HRB work, you may be well advised to keep a digital record. Whether you call it a golden thread or a digital record is irrelevant in my point. The insurers are getting quite clear about this. What you need for whatever work you're doing in order to limit your liability under this omission of 35A is to be able to evidence the fact that the work you undertook was compliant with building regulations until such time as it left your control. So it's just a wider point there. Now, back to HRBs, the completion certificate. There are a number, this is Gateway 3. There are a number of statements that are required. A statement confirming the completion certificate is made, a statement signed with the client confirming that as best the client's knowledge, the HRB as built complies with all applicable requirements of the building regs. Now, how is a client going to sign that off if they can't see the evidence that that is true? Notwithstanding, forgetting the regulatory things, contracts require work in compliance with building regulations. We also need a statement signed by both the client or someone on behalf of the client and the relevant person. Now, relevant persons could be, well, certainly will be the principal accountable person or an accountable person in this new block, but it could also include responsible persons if we've got a mixed-use building. So signed by the client and the relevant persons confirming that a copy of the golden thread and the key building information was provided to the relevant person. As I say, it could be a number of them, and the person has received them. Now, the list there is the prescribed documents, which includes, of course, things like the fire and emergency file and all sorts of other things. So that statement, and I speak to a lot of owners or clients or FM, I'm saying that is the point where you need to look at this golden thread information and make sure you have everything you need. And if you don't sign it. And then the developer or the person undertaking the work will not get completion. And without completion, you can't register the new building and you can't occupy it in the case of a new build. All right, so that is a fundamental point. So when you're talking about compiling the golden thread, as designers, as contractors, you need to be looking at what do you need to provide the evidence at Gateway 3. When you're the owner, you need to make sure that what you're being given is everything that you need. So a clear audit, I would recommend before you sign that document and receive it, because once you've got it as an owner in occupation, it is your responsibility. And the opportunity to get the contractors and designers to contribute, if they need to, will have passed. So focus on Gateway 3 and providing all this evidence of compliance with building regs while you're compiling the golden thread. When we get the handover of information for HRB work, now that includes, of course, refurbishment work, maintenance work, etc., where building regs apply. We've also got to provide the BFLO information, and I'll come to what that means, and the specified golden thread. So theoretically, a contractor is being asked to do some maintenance or a major refurb or something on your property. They should come to you and ask for the current information in the golden thread, undertake the work, update all that information, put it back into your golden thread. That therefore behoves the client for the works or the owner of the building in this example to specify very clearly what it is they're expecting. What format do you want it so that it fits with all the other information you're keeping? In particular, if you've got a large portfolio of properties, you run the risk, if you are not specifying what you want, of having people deliver what they think you want or what they choose to give you. And that could be very difficult to manage in the long run, but that'll be covered later. The second bit of that slide, the golden thread must provide such a way to retain the filing structure, etc., etc. So it's really just underlining the requirement for the client in whichever, whether it's in the building point or whether it's the ownership point, to be very clear about what they want and how they want it. BFLO information, this essentially is the information required by Part B, Part F, Part L, and Part O, including the on-site electricity generation, which is a growing feature. Those parts of the building regulations are very specific about the information that's got to be handed over to the owner of these things. So the BFLO information could be part of, but it needs to be identified differently within the golden thread. This diagram essentially gives you a reasonably good map of what the golden thread is. It starts at gateway 1. You have a fire statement. We don't actually have a golden thread there, but the client is in the purposes for the purposes of a development or new works is preparing how they're going to handle the golden thread. And once you get to gateway 2, it has to be operational. It's part and parcel of the gateway 2 application is you have the client's arrangements for making sure that this works, and they can collect that through their principal designers and principal contractors. And the fire statement should be in that document repository or information repository. Gateway 2, along the top of that, there are the various documents that are required as part and parcel of the application, including, of course, all the design. During the construction phase, all the relevant information is constantly updated and needs to go into the golden thread. The golden thread should be current at any point in time. When you get to gateway through, as I say, that collection is all updated and it is presented to the regulator and indeed to the relevant person who's going to take it over in occupation to say, here is the golden thread, here is the evidence that everything that we've done in design and construction, or whatever work we're doing, complies with the building regulations. When we get to occupation, the golden thread has got slightly different function, as I've said. It is how do you manage building safety risk, spread of fire, structural failure. So these are the documents or the systems that you need to have in place as an owner, as an occupier, as a PAP or an accountable person. So you will have read this from the Higher Risk of Buildings Keeping and Provision of Information England regulations, bottom left there, little paragraph, just to find out where, so you can find out where this comes from. Okay, so a lot of it is the same information, but it needs, the use of it is very different. We are not storing building regs compliance, we are managing risk. So we need to have access to the information that is going to enable me to manage the risk. In particular, when you get to the building safety risk assessment process, when you've got to, and I'm not going to go into that now, but you undertake potentially a hazard exercise to understand what the risks are in your building relating to spread of fire and structural failure, and work out how you're going to mitigate them and or make improvements generally. So that sets out the sort of different application. Here the two are brought together, or three are brought together. Top left there, as I've just said, that's what we're going to be dealing with in occupation. The whole of the stuff on the right would come from a new development, but only part of it is going to be used for active risk management in occupation. The rest of it will be archived, needs to be updated if you want to take works, change doors, etc., etc., etc. Yeah. And then you've got the BFLO information, all of which adds into how you manage the risks in your occupied building. Excuse me. Clients' arrangements, as I've said, are what will facilitate the collection of this. And a client, if you're advising clients or working with clients or are a client, I would strongly recommend you sort out a standard methodology across your portfolio and you impose that on the works that you undertake, on the projects you undertake, whether it's new build or whether it's potentially hundreds and hundreds of smaller projects, all of which need to comply with building regs, all of which need to have the information put into your golden thread and be maintained. The legal requirements, fairly obvious, you probably all know these. The one I've highlighted there is accurate and up to date, constantly. So at any point, if the regulator chooses, they can come in, have a look at the golden thread and see it's up to date. It's a legal requirement. I would suggest it's potentially unlikely unless there is an incident. If a fire officer turns up or building control turn up or the regulator turns up and wants to have a look and it's not accurate and up to date, it is a breach. When we're coming to put the information together, when we're undertaking works, be it new build or be it maintenance, etc., the principal designer is responsible for making sure the designs are uploaded into the golden thread, and where design changes are made, they must keep those changes in the golden thread as well. Once they've handed over the fully designed project at Gateway 2, then the responsibility goes over to the contractor essentially to make sure the build, so the quality control. So the evidence that the design work which has been given is in the golden thread, and that's what we're expected to provide by the regulator. That when they are actually building this, that they have the quality control information, which proves that the work they've undertaken to construct this complies with the design work, which in itself complies with building regulations. Okay. Where building control per an HRB or work is granted, the client must ensure before the construction phase begins, the golden threads includes the fire statement, which is if we're talking about a new build, and all the building control approval application stuff. Okay. Again, the client needs to ensure the golden thread is updated with all building control application decisions. So through the construction phase, there are bound to be design changes. We need to have a very clear change control process, which is part and parcel of one of the other regulations, which I'm sure you're aware of. All these decisions need to go in, so the record is absolutely clear of what has been approved and what has been built, and the evidence sits in the golden thread. We also have to include mandatory occurrence reports. Again, I'm not going to go into that today. We haven't got the time, but they're a very fundamental thing, not unlike RIDOR, but they're looking at significant non-compliance with building regs that could have caused a significant incident, and that is expected to be reported to the regulator. The regulator expects audits or discussions before you start contracting. The idea being, of course, that the last minute run through of the design and the contract, the ability to deliver are done before the problems are built into the building. And then you've got completion certificates. And if you're in occupation and you're employing competent person schemes, which is very common, the competent person schemes have specific amounts of information based on the BFLO, which they will provide or should provide to you. If you want more, if you as a client want it in a particular format, then tell them, put it in your specification, put it in your procurement process, so that what you get is what you need and what you want. There's some very good guidance there. You'll get the slides, I believe. Denise will issue these later. If you haven't seen it and you're responsible for the golden thread, this is very good advice. It is more detailed than the regulations, which are very high level. I would suggest this is also quite high level, but very useful, and it is issued by the CLC and the Building Advisory Committee. So it's official, okay? So get that, it's there free, and it's a very valuable resource, and you should have it. Within that are such commentary as these. The golden thread is the information about a building. Information is not just documents. It's about systems, the information management systems and processes. So what are the processes you as an organization, whether you're a developer or whether you're an owner in occupation, what are your management systems and processes to make sure the golden thread's up to date and accurate? The client's responsible to determine the appropriate procedures for developing, managing, and storing the golden thread in place. I've said this already. This is during the design and construction phase. So where you're building a development, whether you're undertaking refurbishment, it's the client's responsibility. And the client can mean several people. So it's their responsibility. Someone's got to organize it. The principal designer for that project is responsible for putting in the designs, and of course the contractors for making sure that the quality control information that supports the design is put in as well. I won't go through all of these things, but it includes these specific documents which are part of the Gateway 3 process for any major works on an HRB. As I've said, the design phase, the golden thread, is required to demonstrate that the design, when the building, when built, will comply with the building regs. And when you get to the end at Gateway 3, it demonstrates, it evidences compliance with all functional requirements of the building regulations. That's directly out of that official guidance. Once building control has been granted, once approval has been granted, as I say, the principal designer takes a bit of a step back, and it's down to the contractor to make sure that all the information's in place. Now, whether that be a competent person, be it a small contractor, depending on the works you've got to do. But it also means the principal design's got to keep an eye on any design changes. The last paragraph there, it is essential that the information is updated throughout the construction. That's any works, any building works that comply with that need to comply with building regs within or about an HRB. That accurate information is handed over at building completion. As I've noted, when that Gateway 3 approach is made, there has to be a statement from the accountable person, the principal accountable person, and any other responsible person that they have received what they want. Otherwise, you will not get practical completion. Now, very quickly, Denise kindly mentioned the Building Safety Alliance. Given that the regs are high level, given that guidance that's been issued by the CLC is still relatively high level, although the Building Safety Alliance is focused on the occupational stage, and we've issued 3 documents of guidance, one of which is an Excel spreadsheet, 2 others is one, how to use the Excel spreadsheet, and the 3rd one is guidance for those who may not be quite as well aware of what they need to do with regards to the golden thread. I think I've just said that. So one of the things that I think people will find very useful is a very detailed list. It's been prepared over many years by lots of experts, known originally as the list. And down the left-hand side, you will see a list of all the documents that you require to comply with the Building Safety Act and the Fire Safety Act. Along the top there is some guidance. It's a sort of risk analysis of the quality of the information you have if you're in an existing building. You don't have the luxury of a new build and somebody putting all this information together. You have to go away and find some documentation, and you need to have a look at how good it is. So have the information you have to hand, is it accurate? Is it suitable and sufficient for you to be able to manage risks, for you to identify through the hazard what risks you're at? And I think that's going to be a very useful tool. We've also been working with others to try and identify uni-class IDs. Now, some people will understand that, but that is one methodology for digitizing and filing the information. And that is that. So I will stop sharing. I hope I'm on time, Denise.
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks very much for that very comprehensive canter through the guidance, and for all those useful tips that you've imparted. A lot to get to grips with there for asset managers, for sure. I'm going to ask Chris and John now to come in. I think Chris is keen to say a bit about John before he starts his presentation. So over to you guys. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So really pleased to Introduce our next speaker, Mr. John Staves. So he is Managing Director at Michael Aubrey Partnership. John is going to be sharing how his organization is approaching the role of principal designer under the Building Safety Act, and he's going to be talking through some of the key challenges that he's faced and why effective information management is so critical. And we're also going to discuss how Mail Manager is helping his team to improve his decision making, accountability, and overall compliance. So I'm going to hand over to John, and then after that we're going to have a bit of a back and forth Q&A just to find out how John's been getting on so far. So yeah, over to you, John.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I will try sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody's now got that. Is that there, Chris? Okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Let me just start with a brief introduction. He says, there we go. So I'm John Staves. I'm fellow of the ISTRUCT, and I'm founder and managing director at Michael Aubrey Barrow, practice with over 30 years of experience delivering structural and architectural services. We operate under two brands. We've got Michael Aubrey Structural Engineers, focusing on structural assessment and design. And we've also got Create Home Design, dealing with residential and homeowner projects. Our work is grounded in quality, compliance, and genuine commitment to building safety. I gained chartered status back in 1994, interestingly the same year the CDM regulations first came into effect. So that backdrop shaped my career. Safety's always been a big part. I've served as Vice President of the Institution of Structural Engineers and contributed to industry-wide initiatives. And in connection with this topic, most notably was the response to the Hackett report, where I brought a design focus voice basically to the Working Group 9, which concentrated on site supervision. But today, we've just heard about the golden thread on high-risk buildings. I want to shift the spotlight away from the high-profile high-rise buildings, the sort that dominate media headlines, and focus instead on non-high-risk buildings, the kind of work most of us actually deliver most of the time. I'll also explore how information governance and tools like Mail Manager are helping us meet new regulatory standards and prepare for what's ahead. So, from our perspective, the Building Safety Act is probably the most substantial regulatory change we've seen in the built environment in a generation or two. It was born from the tragedy of Grenfell Tower, and its mission is clear: improve safety, transparency, and accountability across all buildings, not just those classified as high risk. Although the Act gives specific attention to higher risk buildings, typically those over 18 metres or with more than 7 stories, the implications of the secondary legislation and updates to building regulations go much further. And this matters because many professionals assume these changes only apply to tower blocks or complex developments. That's not the case. Even smaller scale projects like house extensions, shop refurbs, or office fit outs now fall within this regulatory landscape. And I think Anthony sort of brought that point across a little bit. Any works falling under the building regulations are basically covered by the Building Safety Act. So the duty holders, including, I'm sorry, excuse the little image there, but clients with the pound sign, designers with the calculator, and contractors with the hard hat, we all have to demonstrate competence, not just assume it. We have to comply with heightened design and construction standards, as Anthony's gone into, but these do apply further down the track to smaller projects. And crucially, document the actions that are taken in a way that's accessible, structured, and reviewable. Effectively, the accountability bar has been raised for everyone, everywhere in the built environment. So let's talk specifically about non-high-risk work, which often escapes serious scrutiny until now. The revised regulations are very clear. All work, regardless of the perceived risk level, must be properly planned, managed, and monitored. This is especially important for refurbishment projects where as-built conditions rarely match drawings and changes on site are frequent. For example, you might uncover a structural issue during a wall removal that requires a redesign. If this isn't documented and justified clearly, you're open to compliance risks later. The golden thread of information, a term we'll explore in more depth shortly, is now expected in every project. It's not optional. And let's be honest, a lot of project information still gets lost in personal inboxes or discussed over unrecorded phone calls. But the regulator's stance is unambiguous. If you can't demonstrate compliance, you haven't complied. This has real implications. Liability can now extend to individuals. Building control is becoming more robust, and clients are expected to take a proactive role in ensuring proper record keeping. So let's dive into the golden thread a little bit as it applies. So the golden thread has gone from being a post-Grenfell buzzword to a central tenet of the new regulatory framework. So what is it? And this is probably my interpretation of it and how it's affecting us on smaller projects, but it's the idea that a structured, secure and continuous flow of information must accompany a building from conception through to occupation and operation. For most of us, that means every design change, every site instruction, every risk decision must be documented. Drawings, specifications, RFIs, inspection notes all need to be stored properly, not just emailed and forgotten. And these records need to be accessible, not just now, but in 5, 10, 20 years. It's not just about ticking boxes. It's about enabling future maintenance teams to understand what they're dealing with. It's about ensuring handover documentation isn't a frantic last-minute job. It's about protecting yourself and your team from liability when disputes arise. Failure to manage this effectively results in regulatory breaches, wasted time which costs everybody money, lost money due to rework, and in some cases, there's real legal consequences. This is where digital transformation meets practical necessity. So what's our approach? Well, our approach to the golden thread, we've made it real by transforming how we handle one of the most problematic areas of project communication, email. Emails, while essential, are inherently unstructured. They often contain decisions that aren't captured elsewhere, get filed inconsistently or not at all, and disappear when staff will leave or change roles. To fix this, we've implemented Ideagen Mail Manager, which integrates directly with Outlook and prompts users to file emails. That's key. Enables powerful search so you can find any email across the business instantly. Eliminates siloed communications across departments and ensures continuity even when people move on. This means we can prove compliance. We have documented decisions to support project sign-offs, and we can produce structured digital records at handover. It also improves team collaboration. No more lost context when someone returns from holiday or leaves a project. Mail Manager isn't just about saving time. It's about protecting our practice, our clients, and ultimately the end users of the buildings we help create. But let's be clear, software alone won't fix bad habits. Tools like Mail Manager are just that, tools. So we've worked hard to embed a culture of governance within our team. This means we train staff on why information governance matters and to recognise the importance of it, not just how to file emails, but why it protects them. We've developed clear protocols, what to file, where and how. And we reinforce the mindset that every project deserves a golden thread, whether it's a £2 million commercial build or a domestic extension. The goal is to build habits and culture around transparency, accountability, and structured thinking. Because governance isn't a paper trail, it's a risk strategy, a quality framework, and increasingly a legal necessity. So, to wrap up, the Building Safety Act is transforming our industry, and that includes the work we might once have considered routine. Non-high risk work is still very much in scope for compliance, and rightly so. Information governance is not just a support function anymore. It's at the heart of how we prove compliance, manage risk, and deliver quality. Our adoption of Mail Manager is just one example of how practices can adapt proactively using the right tools, but key, backed by the right mindset. Thank you for your time. I'm now going to hand back to Chris, who I think possibly has a few direct questions for me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. So yeah, I thought it'd be good to kind of take you through a few questions to give a few people on the call some examples of how you've been getting on with Mail Manager so far. So are you okay to kind of describe what your email management process was like before, how you were filing and searching for emails, and kind of what that process looks like now with Mail Manager?
Yeah, okay. So really it was a bit chaotic. We did have a manual process. The team were supposed to be saving emails to job folders, but it was impossible to see it was done. Searching through those emails wasn't straightforward. File names weren't consistent. So ultimately, as it didn't prove valuable to people, the natural human nature kicked in and people just didn't do it. And so we were looking for a solution, and it was brought to bear by a couple of mid-level levers on live projects. And some decisions weren't easy to find in their inboxes, even though we had a process of taking their mailboxes to being shared mailboxes. It was very difficult to find things after the fact.
Okay, amazing. And were there any kind of specific pain points or challenges that made you realize that you need a solution like Mail Manager in place?
I think it was just along the lines of the fact that data was getting trapped in individual inboxes. So when queries came in when somebody was on leave, and being able to pull together why did that happen through the job and keep that kind of record going, very difficult. Whereas now the emails are all stacked in the job folders, and filed away chronologically, easy to search. It's made it really easy.
Amazing. And in terms of the implementation and when you started to use Mail Manager, walk us through kind of the first week using Mail Manager and how was the implementation process for you?
Well, we've implemented software before, so we'd learned from that, and we actually chose to use your implementation service. So that helped big time in terms of structuring what we needed to do. We worked through a series of questions and did the system setup, if you like, in the background, with a limited number of us, and then we all jumped on a call. There's 12 in the practice, so we all jumped on a call at the same time, all with our laptops in front of us, and worked through implementing, going through the description from the implementation team. Have to say, little bit of a shortfall. 8 out of 12 of us managed to get the software onto our machines straight away, and we did have a little bit of toing and froing, but eventually sorted out that actually it probably wasn't a Mail Manager issue. It was probably that some of the machines weren't up to date with the latest Windows and that sort of thing. So we did eventually get there within the first week or so. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And how did everyone react initially to Mail Manager? Like you said, a few people came to you kind of suggesting that you look into it. How did you kind of get people on board to come around to using it?
Um, I think it was about briefing people as to why we were doing it and reminding them why we were trying to save emails. So good governance. It wasn't just a sort of management do this. It was really getting everybody on board with trying to understand why we were doing it and where we're leaving ourselves possibly open to problems in the future. And generally, people, I mean, they're all professionals. At the end of the day, we're a professional team, so people recognise those kind of difficulties and wanted to take parts. But clearly, it's about the culture. You've got to get people understanding why you're doing it to buy into it effectively. They've got to see the value in it for them short term and for the business longer term. And that's what we spent a lot of the time on is getting that sort of side of it. But generally, people are now using it, and I'm seeing filed by Mail Manager, I think a lot more. which is good.
Amazing. No, good to know that the adoption's been good. Do you have any like specific examples or like a positive win you've had with Mail Manager since using it?
I think within the first week of using it, I had somebody come to me and say, "Oh, that's fantastic. Somebody was off and they'd filed their emails into the job, and I could deal with a query that came in while they were on leave." And obviously, as we get into the leave season, that's sort of, and I suppose it's every leave season, every summer that reminds us that we've needed something over past years, and now we've got it. And it sort of within a week, somebody was saying, "This is great. I could just deal with the query because I knew what was going on." Yeah, I think that's one of the key things. Just that being able to cover for colleagues who are off through leave or sickness, you can just deal with it.
Amazing. And how has it kind of changed your kind of team's collaboration around email project communications? Obviously, like I said, a lot of people are off over summer. People are now able to access that information a lot quicker. But how's it affected kind of the collaboration day to day across the team?
I think in a word, it's just simplified. Everybody's more confident that they can find the information they need because it's not hidden in somebody else's inbox. So we work in a kind of matrix, typical project-based organization, really, where different people come together for different projects, where we'll bring the relevant sort of engineer or architect together with the most relevant technician for a particular scope of project. So everybody's working on multiple projects, and you need a quick way to be able to dive in and see what's happening when you pick that job up to do your bit.
Okay, amazing. And then last question, John. Looking ahead, obviously you've been using Mail Manager for a few months now. How do you see Mail Manager fitting into kind of your long-term email management strategy and just overall business operations?
Well, I suppose having experienced the governance issues and knowing that it was a risk within the business, we're also trying to grow. And what you don't want to do is grow a problem. So we're trying to fix the problems before we multiplied it up by growing. So I see it being fairly key to keeping us on track with the email management as we go forward and the team gets bigger and more complicated and projects get larger with more people working on individual projects. It's more important that people can actually all see it. We came from a place where one person would be working on one project and dealing with everything on it. And now we're into a situation where 3, 4, 5 people are on the same project. And it's important that all that knowledge is shared. I've always said there's like a data loss as projects are passed from phase to phase of the project or between people even within the same organization. And this is helping address that point.
Fantastic. And obviously, but before Mail Manager, you had a process in place, and like I said, people didn't really understand that the value of why it was so important to do so, so they never did. What would you say to someone that the manual process is fine, we'll leave it up to the users if they were considering using a system like Mail Manager?
You can't leave it up to the users. You've got to put something. It's got to be something useful. It's got to have a short-term use to the individual, so that they will then provide the business with the long-term value by having the files properly stored.
Amazing. Well, no, John, really appreciate you kind of going into details with your experience so far. So yeah, Denise, I'm gonna hand back over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Chris, and thank you so much, John, for that really informative presentation and talking us through your experience with Ideagen Mail Manager. We now have about 10 minutes or so for general Q&As from our audience. So you're all join me, I see on screen. I'll kick off with the Q&As. I think we'll start with this one because it was something that occurred to me as well, which might have been a bit confusing. Graham Barker is mentioning that he thought there was a bit of a contradiction between the presentation one from Anthony speaking about the golden thread being a requirement for HRBs, and then John talking about the presentation being applicable to all projects. I guess the thing is that it is applicable to all projects, but it's only mandatory for HRBs, if my understanding is right. Do you want to, John, Anthony, do you want to just clarify?
No, I'll take that. As I did say, it is mandatory, as you're absolutely correct, for HRB work, whether
Yeah,
you're developing or undertaking work when you're in occupation.
yeah,
But as I also mentioned, as John picked up, that if you are doing work, any building work to which building control regulations apply, you're going to need to keep a digital record. Now, whether you call it a golden thread or a digital record, you still need to keep the records, which is what John has been saying. You know, because you still have to evidence, and you need to maintain the evidence that you comply with building regulations. Otherwise, as I mentioned, the omission of that section 35A of the Building Act 1984 leaves you open to proceedings, if I put it like that, or enforcement of non-compliance with building regs for an unlimited time period. So
right.
you need to keep it. Now, whether you call it a golden thread or a digital record is neither here nor there.
Okay, so so just to clarify then, you're saying you've got to have evidence, whichever building you're involved with, you've got to have evidence that you comply with the building regulations, but it doesn't have to be an exact process as prescribed by the golden thread, you know, all the
Possibly, but I would suggest that, as I mentioned, that any client, if
yeah.
they've got any sense, will be determining what information they want, and the contract will say compliant with building regs. So how are you going to evidence to your client?
Okay.
Yeah.
The tricky bit, Denise, is really where it's change control on smaller projects.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That's the bit where it's always gone wrong. That's the bit where decisions have always been made without reference back to the designer over the last. I've seen the amount of input of designers to the build phase reduce over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Smaller clients see it as a cost that they don't want. And I think now with the new building control regime, so although they're not a duty holder under the Act, the separate legislation for building control is making building control officers take a different view on site, and they are referring clients and builders back to the designer, is what we're finding. And that change control process is starting to evolve naturally, which is good.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, building control and historically building control officer would say, I'll just do that and I'll sign it off. Well, that's marking your own homework, and that's what this whole system is stopping.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
I don't
we
know whether
are
you agree with that,
getting,
Anthony, but that's how I see it
I
working. It's
entirely
stopping.
agree.
Yeah.
I entirely agree. I did hear in my earshot, in the conversation with a regulator, that the Act was designed to be disruptive because we had to change what has gone on for the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And indeed, it is disruptive, as I think many of us are finding. However, I would suggest that a great deal of the new regulation is actually not much more than we should have been doing for years. It's just no one's enforced it.
I agree. If you're doing your job to a good professional standard, it's actually more process than actually the job that's affected.
Correct.
And
Correct.
just this fact that you've got an audit trail and demonstrating that you've done things
And
as
the
opposed to just doing them.
The
Yeah.
accountability, personal accountability.
Yeah.
That's the big difference.
well, I hope that's answered your query there, Graham. Question here from Chris Bracewell. Very good question. He's asking you, Anthony, could you expand on the development of the golden thread into the building safety case?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that's a whole half day. However,
Oh, okay.
no.
We
However,
haven't quite got time for that,
No,
but
no.
is there any way you could point Chris to go
when
to?
you are building a safety case, part and parcel of that is undertaking the building risk assessment. In order to undertake that, the recommended way, it's not the only way, is to undertake the hazard expectation. What would happen if, or if that happened, what would be the consequences? All right. Now, a hazard is exactly what it says. It's a hazard identification. So if you've got a group sitting around a table and say, what happened? Let us just say, for example, by way of illustration, a one of these scooters was plugged into electric scooters, and it blew up. And whoever's flat it was ran out of the door. For one reason or another, the door didn't shut. You've now got toxic fumes and very hot fire that's expanded out, all right, spread of fire. You are going to need to go back to your golden thread in order to get the information to determine whether or not that compartment and the wider compartment, which include the corridor, is adequate to retain fire, let us say fire or structural collapse of that nature. So as part of the risk assessment, you're going to need to be able to go back to this information to inform yourself with the evidence that your building is as you have assumed it is. And then you build up your case. And the case is essentially, the simplest way I can put it, it is the case to the regulator. And you say, good afternoon, regulator. My case to you that my building is safe and will remain safe is due to this. I know what the building's made of, hence the information. I know the risks. I've looked at them and I've gone back and found the evidence that supports my assumptions. Evidence, evidence, evidence. I've got procedures in place to test, maintain, service, whatever it happens, and everybody who's dealing with it is competent. That is my case to you. And then you summarize all of that, including the fact that you've got this golden thread, in your safety case report, which is a summary, which is providing the regulator with an introduction of how you see that you're managing your building. How are you doing it? Do you know what your building is? Who's responsible? Are they competent? It's a summary, but whatever statements you make in your building safety report must be supported by the evidence, and the evidence will be in the golden thread because that's where the information's held. Hopefully that helps.
Okay.
Can I add something there?
You'd like to add something, John, you say?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it's just so finding building records. So obviously HRBs, you've got the formal position with the building safety case,
Yeah.
but any project on an existing building, we've got a term in our practice called the structural detective, because we end up playing detective before we can start the job. And I think that's what you're talking about here, Anthony. It's about gathering that information together to know the starting point. And whether you're doing that to do a risk assessment for a safety case, or whether you're doing that to competently carry out a design for an alteration, that's a key thing. It's that detective kind of role. And we just termed it that. I mean, it's finding out all the existing information, and we just term it the structural detective because that's what we feel like we have to be before we can get going on a project on an existing building.
And then making sure that the information you have got is accurate and current. And I would just add, in the event of an incident, what's the first thing the regulator or the enforcing officer is going to ask for? Why did this happen? Who was competent? What was the basis of the information? What was the evidence that you formed to undertake your risk assessment, to undertake this method of dealing with things? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? It's evidence-based.
Okay, thank you. We've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to push on with a few more, and hopefully people can stay with us for a little bit longer. Quickly, Anthony, just someone's asked, could you just clear up when you talk about section 38 as a
35A.
35? Okay, that's what they thought. So that's
it's 35A.
Okay.
I've got my note here.
Okay.
It's in the Building Safety Act.
Okay.
Schedule 5.
Yeah.
Part 3. Well, part of it. It amended the Building Act of 1984. And that's where section 35A, it's still there, but it's omitted from October 23.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I'm just going to ask Ed Dwight's question, and then I'm going to come to a couple of questions to you, Chris. he's asking, can the speakers recommend where to find out how golden thread process and information categories align with ISO 9650 for information management? And either of you know anything that could give some direction for that?
Some of the experts who were working with the Alliance and our guidance are experts in that. There are so many different ways of doing it, is the problem, and people are going at it. So I would suggest that what we have proposed in the building safety align with that, but there are no standards per se to deliver a golden thread. That's quite purposeful in that the regulator did not want to say you will do exactly this. There's no tick box. The nearest tick box you've got is the Building Safety Alliance.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just come back to quick question on Ideagen Mail Manager. Someone's asking, well, a couple of things. When you're talking about filing emails, is the subject title that important? And secondly, can you feed historic emails into Mail Manager, or does it only work with live emails? John, sorry, Chris, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, definitely. So in regards to subject line, it doesn't have to be perfect. So before you start using Mail Manager, we'll connect to all of your existing project folders, which will obviously be the name of the specific projects that you may be putting in the subject line. But again, if this text or keywords are somewhere in the body of the email or the subject, Mail Manager is going to use machine learning over time and learn your filing behavior and pick up these keywords. Again, if it doesn't pick it up right away, you can search to a specific folder, and then again, it will learn your behavior from those kind of emails. But subject doesn't have to be perfect. But of course, the closer you can get it to the project name you're looking to file to, the better. And in regards to historical data, yes, you can bulk file using Mail Manager to your SharePoint, your file server. So all of information that might just be sitting in Outlook right now, you can move it to the SharePoint, and then all of that information is now searchable via Mail Manager to not only you, but other people in the business as well. So yes, you can file historic emails as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I would say that's probably somebody thinking about the classic where you've got subfolders in your inbox for each project you're working on. You can just grab that whole folder full and move it to that project, and it will sort out by date and time and file everything away for you. So lets people clear their inboxes down on historic stuff as well.
Oh, I could do with it. Just while we're on Mail Manager, how does it manage permissions and confidential emails and attachments? How does that work?
Yeah, so in regards to permissions, like I mentioned, file server and SharePoint are probably the most popular, centralized file servers that we do connect to. The permissions are going to be mapped to your existing permissions that you set up. So, just because you've now started filing things with Mail Manager, people aren't going to be able to go into the search and just view everything. People are going to have access to the exact same information that they do right now.
Okay.
Yeah, it mirrors your existing permissions.
Okay. Perhaps you could answer this one, John. Someone's asking about how you can, your referenced email chains and things in your presentation, where decisions have been taken, etc. But how can all of that then be transferred to a client? Someone is asking. Do you?
Well, you have actually you've got all that email information is collated and it's
Yeah,
easily searched within the Mail Manager setup. So searching is a lot more powerful than it is within Outlook alone.
yeah.
But to transfer it, we've not actually directly bulk transferred emails across yet. But what it does allow us to do is create a chronology of what things, what key decisions happen. So we can, and then the email is the evidence of that, rather
Okay.
than transferring every email that's happened. But yeah. So I mean, no system's perfect, is it? You almost need a running log as to what's happened, and email on that date confirms it, kind of thing. But if you want to then pass that on as part of the log.
Okay.
Just to add to that, Denise, with the search and the different filters, you can create custom reports and CSV files of, you know, certain emails from a certain employee between a certain time frame on a certain project. You can export that as a CSV and pass that on to clients, and again, just give you the list of emails. So yeah, there's a few different ways you can kind of pass it on to clients.
Okay, thank you. I know we haven't got much time, so just briefly, a few people are expressing sort of frustrations with trying to change the culture, and someone, Kevin Dorrington, is actually asking that, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to persuade clients and the builders continue, you know, to operate in a more sort of robust way in terms of evidencing building regulation compliance and things. Any tips or anything like that for you know,
I
culture,
could
bringing
answer a
out a
bit of that.
cultural change?
It is recognised that cultural change is yet to come. That doesn't alter the fact that it should be here already. I would suggest that the only way you're going to influence a client essentially is to point out government guidance. You know, it's a simple thing. It's not an option. You know, the fact of the matter, this is the law. The issue regarding culture often has a sort of sub-issue. Is this going to cost me more? And that's the reality. And the reality of much of it is, yes, it will cost a little bit more, but getting it wrong or not doing it is going to cost you an awful lot more. So,
Yeah.
you know, there is still confusion out there between clients about why have I got to do this. There is at the other end of it, residents saying, I don't want to pay for any more, you know, I've got enough. So there is an issue of cost. There's no point pretending there isn't. But the law is the law. There is plenty of guidance out there for all actors, if I use that expression. And I think the only expression is, and frankly, if you are a professional and your client is not prepared to follow the law, I should think very carefully about doing business with them. Not an
Yes.
easy choice,
No.
that otherwise you're compliant. Or
Yeah.
complicit, I should say. Complicit is what I meant,
Mm.
in their non-compliance.
We
Yeah.
have sorry, we just have a comment from someone, Jeffrey Smith is just saying that it's almost turning the clock. Is it almost like turning the clock back to the clerk of works, because in a
Yeah,
way this is what they might be doing.
yeah. There are increasing jobs going for clerk of works, but actually
Yeah,
skill sets disappeared.
yeah,
It's one of the problems. So there aren't very many, and they're quite expensive. But they are going to deliver what you need, theoretically. As I
yeah,
said,
yeah,
you know,
for Kevin,
particularly
for
with golden
Kevin's
thread
sort of question.
information, and my final comment is focus on trying to get completion, because without this information, you're not going to get it.
Yeah. So we've done work educating some of the builders we work with regularly. So where Kevin's asking about persuading the builder, if the builder's also saying to the client, you've got to keep the designer on board for the build phase, that's also a positive. So we've looked at it. So we've pointed out to the builders, are they competent to make design decisions during the construction phase? And are they prepared to become the principal designer where we hand over at the end of the design phase? So we say, here's a compliant design. Are they prepared? Are they competent? Note the word competence. Are they competent to be the principal designer through the construction phase? The client, we point out that the client has to have a principal designer who
yeah,
has to be competent, as well as a principal contractor who has to be competent.
yeah,
And making that point, and the fact that it's a client duty to ensure those roles are in place, forces them to then ask, the client will ask the builder if he's competent to be that, and it will force that situation where you stay involved. And it is a cost, but it is how to remain compliant. And as Anthony said, a good client will want to remain compliant. A bad client you might not want to work for.
No, no,
Yeah. It's
certainly.
also an obligation, coming from John's comment there, that it is not one of the duties of the actors, designers, clients, constructors, etc., is to only undertake work for which you're competent, bracketed with refuse to undertake work that you know or can see or concern is not compliant.
Okay.
And that's pretty powerful. If you want to put yourself as an
Yes, it
individual,
is.
if you want to put yourself as an individual at risk of that, best of luck.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. There are quite a few more questions that we could have taken, but I'm just conscious of time, and I'm going to have to draw this webinar to a close, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for answering the questions so candidly. Just to say that the webinar has been recorded, so you can watch it again or share the video with your colleagues, and that's via the original registration link, and that will be all available from tomorrow morning. There are the websites on the screen for the organisations that our speakers represent, and you can find out more about those organisations just by going onto the website, which I'm not going to read out. You can just take a picture or just see the video again. And I and there's a piece about Anthony's the Building Safety Alliance Golden Thread guidance in Project Safety Journal as well. If you want to read that, it's all completely free to access. You don't have to be a member of the APS or anything. So I'll point that out to you. So that's all the information. It just remains for me really to say thank you very much to Ideagen Mail Manager for supporting this webinar, and to thank you very much, Anthony, John and Chris, for your time and fantastic input today, and for, as I said, for answering the questions. That's been really brilliant. And thank you very much to our audience for tuning in. So have a good rest of the day, everyone, and see you for the next PSJ webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you.